proceed in public session. Deputy Angus Snoddig is substituting for Deputy Seán Crowe. Before proceeding to the business of the meeting, may I remind members and those in the public gallery that their mobile phones should be switched off completely for the duration of the meeting, as they cause interference, even if on silent mode, with the recording equipment in the committee rooms. The purpose of today's meeting is to consider the motion referred to the Select Committee by Dáil Éireann in relation to 1. Motion on the agreement between the Member States of the European Union concerning the status of military and civilian staff seconded to the institutions of the European Union, and 2. North Atlantic Treaty Organisation Partnership for Peace status of Forces Agreement. Under the terms of the Dáil motion of the 16th of January 2019, the Committee must consider the matter, and having done so, must send a message back to the Dáil not later than the 5th of February 2019. I welcome Minister of State with Responsibility for Defence, Deputy Paul Cho, to our meeting today. I also welcome the officials from the Department at today's meeting and thank them for the briefing material forwarded to us in advance of the meeting. The format of this meeting is that we will hear the opening presentation from the Minister and then take questions from the members. Before commencing, I wish to remind members of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the Houses or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. I now call on Minister Cho. Minister.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm joined today by Kieran Murphy and Bernie Maguire. I will make a short opening statement outlining the motion that I will bring before the Dáil for final consideration in the coming weeks. I will also highlight the need for the approval of the terms of both the EU Status of Forces Agreement SOFA and the NATO Partnership for Peace SOFA. I will explain throughout this statement that such approval will not and does not retract from our national policy of military neutrality. As you are aware, the following motion has been placed on the Dáil order paper, and copies of the agreements concerned, along with Ireland's proposed reservations, were laid in the Dáil Library earlier this month on January the 2nd. I move that Dáil Éireann approve terms of the agreement between Member States of the European Union concerning the status of military and civilian staff, seconded to the institutions of European Union of the headquarters and forces that may be made available to the European Union in the context of the preparation and execution of the tasks referred to in Article 17.2 of the Treaty of the European Union, including exercises of the military and civilian staff of the Member States put at the disposal of the European Union to act in this context, done at Brussels on the 17th of November 2003, a copy of which was laid before Dáil Éireann on the 2nd of January 2019, and 2. The North Atlantic Treaty Organisation Partnership for Peace Status of Forces Agreement, done at Brussels on the 19th of June 1995, a copy of which was laid before Dáil Éireann on the 2nd of January 2019 also. Subject to the respective reservations, copies of which were laid before Dáil Éireann on the 2nd of January 2019. Approval of this motion will allow Ireland to become party to the SOFAs, and thereby will afford our defence forces the same immunities, rights and privileges as their military colleagues, while serving overseas on peacekeeping and crisis management operations. I want to ensure that we have a shared understanding of what a SOFA is throughout our discussion this morning. A Status of Forces Agreement, or SOFA, is designed to regulate to the legal administrative arrangements applied to members of foreign forces operating within the state, with state where they are deployed in relation to defence forces. SOFAs relate to the immunities and privileges extended to members of the defence forces when serving on missions overseas as part of the UN authorised or UN mandated force. Specific SOFAs also relate to the immunities and privileges extended to members of the defence forces when engaged in exercises in EU or NATO and partnership with these member states, or on standby for the EU battle group. This will be the case of EU and PFP SOFAs. All international organisations, including the UN, the EU and NATO, have concluded SOFAs with the states where they have deployed forces or engaged in training missions. The SOFAs provide for the rights, obligations, entitlements, privileges and immunities of deployed military personnel and deal with matters such as jurisdiction claims, applicable law between the sending organisation state and the host state which these personnel are deployed. SOFAs are designed to protect military personnel deployed in terms of accidents, third-party liability claims, potential prosecutions and other actions which may be covered by legislation in the host country. The ratification of the SOFAs simply means that the Defence Forces can acquire the rights and privileges of these arrangements as a matter of right, rather than having to rely on a difficult or contentious exchange of letters between jurisdictions which may or may not be concluded. On their behalf, we cannot continue to operate on this basis. Our Defence Forces should be protected in the same manner as all other military personnel with whom they operate on missions and exercises when deployed outside of the state. In the past, issues have unnecessarily arisen in relation to the completion of an exchange of letters through no fault of either party concerned. To resolve such issues requires that Ireland depends on the goodwill of EU or other partners. Ultimately, situations have arisen where no exchange of letters is agreed or the Defence Forces are restricted in their participation or operate without the relevant protections. This was a reality in 2016 when, as part of Ireland's participation in the German-led battle group, Germany advised that it could not facilitate the exchange of letters, arrangements in the time required due to legal, constitutional and parliamentary requirements. In the case of this battle group, the immunities and privileges afforded to foreign militaries could only be extended to the PFP SOFA. As a result, Ireland could not participate in the field exercises undertaken by all other battle groups participants in the German battle group. This is unsatisfactory from a training and interoperability perspective, but also resulted in some reputational damage. We also had to rely on the goodwill of partners and members of the Defence Forces in respect of their deployment to the battle group operational headquarters for the standby period. Irish troops have, on occasion, been deployed to the mission areas or operational force headquarters prior to the conclusion of letters of exchange. This was experienced in the case of the 3-month deployment of the EU Artemis mission in the Congo in 2003. For this mission, the relevant exchange of letters was never completed, as the troops had been deployed, had completed the mission and had withdrawn before the exchange of letters could be completed with France, the then lead nation. I would like to get these matters resolved before our proposed participation in the German-led battle group in 2020. Planning is currently underway for this battle group, and the Defence Forces personnel should be able to participate in the same manner and with the same protections as the military personnel from all other participating member states. The EU SOFA has been ratified by all EU member states except Ireland. It can only come into force upon ratification by Ireland. You will appreciate that our current situation is especially evident given that all other non-aligned or neutral member states, including Finland, Sweden, Austria, have ratified the EU SOFA. I would like to highlight that approval from the Dáil is not required in relation to ratification of the EU SOFA that is covered by the Lisbon Treaty. I have included the approval of the EU SOFA in the motion for the sake of transparency. In relation to the PFP SOFA, it is important to note that the EU crisis management operations and battle groups have operated under this agreement where there has been third state participation in operations. Very often common security and defence policy missions and operations also involve third state participation from non-EU member states. These third states are usually party to the PFP SOFA, but not only to the EU SOFA, therefore making it more appropriate to apply the PFP SOFA in such context. These SOFAs will only extend to members of the PFP deploying overseas where the SOFA apply. They cannot apply within the state. Article 15(6)(2) of the Constitution states that no military or armed force other than a military or armed force raised and maintained by the Oireachtas shall be raised or maintained for any purpose whatsoever. Taking the Attorney General's advice on this provision in relation to the application of SOFAs in Ireland, as well as the policy advice that I received from my department, I have decided to include reservations to both agreements. Ireland will not be receiving state for foreign troops based on its territory, and there is no situation in which the SOFAs could have application in Ireland, including forces in transit or visiting personnel. The proposed EU SOFA reservation and the NATO PFP reservation explicitly articulate Ireland's constitutional and policy position in respect of foreign troops. There is no scope for ambiguity, given the inclusion of the following clause in both reservations. Ireland shall not be a receiving state for the purposes of the present agreement. These reservations will be associated with Ireland's instrument of the ratification in respect of each of the SOFAs should this motion be approved by Dáil Éireann. I cannot stress enough, Chairman, that Ireland's policy of military neutrality is not diminished, circumvented or reduced by our ratification of the SOFAs. If anything, our national position is more strongly discernible following this process. Following the reservations, we are attaching to our instruments of ratification. These reservations, as I have stated, do not allow for any ambiguity. Our Defence Forces and the wider Defence Force organisation continue to make an invaluable contribution to international peace and security and conflict resolution. In doing so, we rarely act alone. Our positive contribution is achieved through our ongoing and professional engagement with the UN, the EU, NATO and OSCE and other international engagements within a bilateral and multilateral context. Security and defence today must be considered in the light of new threats and security challenges which are beyond the capacity of any individual state acting alone. Challenges such as cyber, hybrid, radicalisation, uncontrolled migration, among others. In addressing these challenges, while working with partners and host states operating under the EU or NATO PFP SOFA would place our defence forces on an equal legal footing with their military colleagues from participating in such missions, which is only right and proper. In conclusion, I would like to state again that approval of the terms of the SOFA agreements does not adversely affect our military neutrality. The SOFA will allow for our defence forces to be protected in the same manner as all other military personnel with whom they operate on missions and exercises when deployed outside the state, all while making an invaluable contribution to international peace and security and conflict resolution. Finally, I would like to thank you all for your attention and look forward to discussing the matter, which I hope we can have a constructive discussion. Thank you very much, Seán.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan.
Thank you very much, Minister. Looking at it on one side, that these SOFAs are providing for, as you say, the rights, the obligations, entitlements, etc., of our military personnel when they're deployed overseas, and that there is no obligation to deploy or maintain personnel, and that's going to be a national sovereign decision, and ratifying this has no impact on our policy of military neutrality. And one wouldn't want to deprive Irish troops of some of entitlements and privileges that other troops are entitled to. But when you look at the mission in Mali, for example, I don't know how anybody could call that a peacekeeping mission. And just, looking at the footage that came when the Taoiseach was there, and while the Irish Army were very impressive, very professional in their work, but I think that overall Mali situation is a very different one. the Mali and the Sahel, and the whole history of colonialism and mineral wealth being exploited by the colonial power, and the current chaotic situation, which was exacerbated by the overthrow of Colonel Gaddafi, and all the volatility and the corruption and peaceful protests being suppressed there. And you contrast Ireland's troops being there with Irish personnel, Irish work that goes on through our humanitarian programme and through our Irish aid programme. And that was also, I mean, it was such a contrast between what the Taoiseach visited in Mali and then what we saw in Ethiopia. And to me, it's a contradiction between them. And I would be very wary of Ireland and the Irish Army being drawn into conflicts that really they have nothing to do with us, and they're undermining the work that Ireland does in the humanitarian area, where we are very much respected. And it's also undermining our reputation as peacekeeping, or the peacekeeping operations. Now, we are seeing that increasing European securitisation agenda, and it's being matched now by this increasing militarisation in Africa. And to me, that's fueling further conflict, which is the very contributing factors to poverty and displacement, and that leads to mass migration. So I just have a couple of questions. I'll just go back here. The first one is, you know, you're saying that the Defence Forces will have the immunities, rights, privileges while they're on peacekeeping and crisis management operations. How does Mali fit into that, compared with the other peacekeeping operations that Ireland has been involved in? Secondly, I mentioned about the German-led battle group coming up. You might just expand on that a little bit. And of course, again, the irony that, you know, you mentioned there that they're not going to be receiving foreign troops based on our territory, but that's playing with words, because we are facilitating the transit of troops. We see how the way in which Shannon is being used. So I think there's a number of ironies in what's being presented here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Just on the Defence Forces' contribution to the German battle group will involve a Special Operations Task Force comprising Special Operations Forces, platoon, engineer, special search capability, explosive ordnance disposal, capability and security platoon, together with staff posts at both the operational and force headquarters. And I think I'll just take one out of that, and that is the explosive ordnance disposal. I think, Deputy, coming from the part of Ireland that you come from, we've seen an awful lot of members of the Defence Forces having to give their services for the explosive ordnance disposal over the last while. I'm not sure if that happened in your constituency. I don't want to diminish your constituency in any way, but I know in definitely parts of Dublin we've seen that. So I think it is so important that we exercise, train, have the capability of being able to have the opportunity to continue our training, increase our training capacity and everything like that, and to be able to, when called on, to go out and to deal with whatever the eventuality is. The total number of the Irish Defence Force personnel that will be involved in the German battle group will be about 148 personnel. The level of resource commitment will only arise should the battle group be called on to undertake an operation and should Ireland agree to participate. And the number of personnel involved in leading up to and during the standby period where the battle group has not been mobilised to undertake an operation will be in the region of 10. These personnel, mainly staff officers and NCOs, will be engaged in training and planning activities, serving in various appointments and posts in the operational and force headquarters in ULM in Germany. And just on that, I have had the opportunity to go and visit battle group exercises and participate in such exercises, right, on a policy side. And it is only when you actually go to see the battle group on the ground that I've seen the importance of these battle groups. That when we go to in missions overseas, let it be in wherever it is, let it be in Mali, let it be in Lebanon, let it be on the Golan Heights, the importance of interoperability, working with like-minded states, being able to increase our training capacity and everything like that. So what some people want is is to give to send our defence forces absolutely to Lebanon and say they're doing a fabulous job over there. But there's no use just training in Ireland and doing, like, running around the Glen and the Mal or down in Kilworth and Cork when we don't have someone to exercise against. So, like, if I'll take a sporting analogy, if any team were just to train on their own home ground and not to have practice matches, well, then when they go up in the championship, I don't believe that they'll be able to give out their best. So the importance of Ireland being able to participate with like-minded states on the importance of interoperability, working with other like-minded states, and to keep their training to a very high rate and high standard, I think it is so important. On the issue of EUTM Mali, I had the privilege of visiting there with the Taoiseach back in January. It was my second time to have an opportunity to visit there. It's an EU training mission. There is also a UN Blue Hat mission is applied in Mali in support of the sovereign government in Mali. But what we are doing there at the moment is a training mission in training the Malian armed forces. And I think it's only right and proper that we give them the opportunity that they are highly trained, highly skilled, that we can bring back some sort of ordinary life back into Mali. I think it's only right and proper that they would have the opportunity to be able to do that, to bring it back to a stable country. And unless you have trained soldiers, armed forces, to be able to do that, we're doing it in, I don't think we're doing it in Lebanon, but it's the same thing as in Lebanon, but there's other countries that help the Lebanese armed forces to train their army, to train their armed forces. I think it's only right and proper. You cannot expect any country to have a highly skilled army unless there's somebody coming in willing to be able to help train and give them the capacity to carry out their daily duties.
I think we could have a bigger debate as to what actually brings stability and whether it's armed forces or whether it's really looking at the social and economic situation in the country that leads to justice and fairness. So there's no need for people going to those extremist groups, which leads into conflict and what we're talking about now.
I think it's a wider argument, Deputy. I think it
have to be for another day.
Absolutely, Chairman.
Deputy Snoddy.
On this one, where do you start? Start maybe with what the sofas are about. They're not for sitting on. They're basically to grant immunity in the case of prosecution in the main, but they're also for things that are probably a bit more benign, car crashes and the likes, for soldiers operating overseas. But if we look at how sofas have been used by other militaries over recent years, we can see exactly what the consequences are, and it's whether Ireland wants to be associated with those militaries on operations overseas, especially given what we've seen in Iraq, in Somalia and the likes. I'm not suggesting in any way, in case somebody wants to misrepresent, that Irish soldiers are in any way engaged or would be engaged, but we saw what happened in Abu Ghraib prison, for instance, the humiliation of prisoners of war by US soldiers. I presume the same soldiers would have a SOFA as well, because they were all returned to America to face charges, which they did in a US court, not in an Iraqi court. And there's a huge difference between what you would face if you were in front of, if you want to, where the incidents happened. The same occurred in Canada, which would be regarded by most countries as quite a peaceful country, when their soldiers ran amok in Somalia and beat a teenager to death, and the footage. So these things happen. They are soldiers, but the SOFAs basically give them protections from the local courts and the local justice system, so that they can be returned back to their home country and face obviously prosecution in some cases, but it is totally different. The questions in relation to this is why now, which still hasn't been answered, albeit the Minister, strangely enough in his contribution, says that approval of the Dáil is not required for the ratification of the EU SOFA. Well then, what the hell is it doing? If we don't need to ratify it, we have enough other material that we need to be getting into. I think it was produced and linked to this SOFA, which is the PFP one, to give it some type of cover, that maybe linking it to EU battle groups is the key reason. For people who aren't aware, Partnership for Peace is a NATO organisation. For us to have any link at all with it is contrary to our neutrality. And it's also contrary, was at the time, contrary to the promise made by the party in government at the time when they stood for election prior to that. So that's one of the questions. Why now? The original SOFA, which was requested of all the countries who were in Partnership for Peace, which included the government at the time, was 23 years ago, 1995. The next one, the EU SOFA, is from 2003, so it's not any new construction. And then, interestingly enough, and I just checking there, so sorry, I wasn't paying 100% heed to what you were saying, Minister, when you opened up. Deputy Mick Wallace raised an interesting point which he didn't respond to in his contribution at the opening gambit, if you want, in the Dáil on this last week. He said that a WikiLeaks cable from 2009 that an Assistant Secretary from the Department of Defence tells a US political officer of Ireland's hope to ratify the EU SOFA and the NATO Partnership for Peace SOFA in 2010. Obviously it didn't happen. I was in the Dáil at the time. I attended virtually all of these committees that related to defence matters. I have no recollection of any attempt being made for that SOFA to be put before the Houses, yet there was promises being made, or the US were being told that such changes were in the offing. Yet since 2010, I haven't heard sight nor sound of this. Is it a tidying up of some of the side issues in relation to preparing us for more intense or greater links with the EU army that has been proposed? And I know the answer the Minister will give, but every step that has been taken further moves in the way that those within France and Germany this week were in particular out on the need for a European army. And also, is it a move towards tidying up some of the side issues which are preventing us from deeper ingraining ourselves in that military operation? I know some within his own party, and he's not, Minister, you're not here to answer for your party, but within Europe, the MEPs of your own party wish full integration in the EU military apparatus and into NATO itself. They produced a policy document to that effect only a few short months ago. So is this before us because of that? Thus far, the operation of, or the lack of operation of SOFAs on the level that you now want us to do has not in the main hampered us, but you quoted a number of incidents that if there was difficulty. Now, was the difficulty in the exchange of letters because the they weren't sent in time. They're, like we've seen sometimes bureaucratic hiccups, especially last year in October when Irish UNIFIL troops couldn't return home because, again, documentation, we were told at the time, weren't sent in time or weren't responded to in time. So what it was the fault, for instance, in terms of the EU battle group, the German one, and our failure to take part in operations or exercise then from a German bureaucratic point of view? Was it because of our fault? Or is it that the Germans were putting pressure on us by refusing or being obstructive in terms of the exchange of letter to try and force you then to come before the House and get this SOFA passed? Has there been any difficulty with the UN when Irish troops are on UN duties, which I presume we also have a SOFA with? Has there been any difficulties? Because if there isn't, the logic therefore, and it's the logic I've argued over the years, is that rather than looking and chasing after other military organisations to get involved in, that we should concentrate on our involvement with the UN. And the information I have is that there hasn't been difficulties being on UN missions. So there's your logic. We do not have to pass these two SOFAs today or at any stage when we already have quite an effective operating SOFA which deals with what is laudable, which is what is acceptable to the Irish people, UN missions abroad. I leave it at that, and I may come back in after, but I think I've managed to cover most.
Thanks, Deputy Study Minister.
Deputy, there's a wide-ranging questions there, and I start by saying you've been at RACO and PD4 conferences over the last number of years. I know it has been raised of me by members of the Defence Forces at all of these conferences and outside of these conferences. I've often been accused of not listening to the members by ourselves, and then when I do act on what they're looking for, I'm accused of why are you doing that? And I actually believe our Defence Forces should be protected in the very same manner as all other military personnel with whom they operate on missions and exercises when deployed outside of the state. And actually, I genuinely believe that myself. And maybe you don't believe that, but I actually do.
I didn't say that.
And let me say, like, you know, when you have other neutral member states, including Finland, Sweden and Austria, who have ratified the EU SOFA, and then I'm being accused of, yes, it doesn't have to be approved by Dáil Éireann. I can just do this at cabinet level and forget about it, okay?
That wasn't what you said.
No, 1 second. But if I do that, I can be absolutely assured, Deputy, that I would have, I'm not saying you'll be jumping up and down, but you definitely would raise this and saying that, am I trying to pull the wool over everybody's eyes? But there'll be other members of the House saying, am I trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the members here by not bringing this to the Dáil? I'm being open, I'm being transparent, I'm being honest, and because I understand this is a very sensitive area for an awful lot of people. But I feel, as Minister with responsibility for defence, this is the right thing to do for members of our Defence Forces. And you started off about other states and the Irish might get in trouble. What other states do is a matter for them. Ratification of the SOFAs by Dáil Éireann will give privileges to our personnel and protect them. It is not a means to enable forces to avoid responsibility for any illegal actions, and that certainly will not be the intention of bringing these SOFAs through. You asked, why now? And I give you the reasons as to the why now. Let me state, since I've had the privilege of being in the Department of Defence since 2011, and this has been an issue. And I've raised this with previous ministers, and I've raised it with ministers when I was in opposition also. I'm not sure if I'm on the record of the House of raising it, but I know for a fact I would have raised it with them privately. And I was told this was a very challenging and legal matter that required extensive engagement with the Office of the Attorney General and has had that engagement over a prolonged period of time. And while it is my decision to proceed with this process at this juncture, it is important to acknowledge that the case of ratifying the EU SOFA has grown over recent years, given the difficulties that we have experienced in completing the exchange of letters in certain instances. And I'll just touch on the exchange of letters, which involves an exchange of national correspondence between Ireland and either the lead state of the operation or the host state, which the relevant privileges, immunities and indemnities under the Irish Defence Forces personnel operating on overseas missions or operations are outlined and agreed through correspondence. An exchange of letters with lead or host nations on missions and exercises is necessary in the absence of the SOFA, and Ireland is unique in having to pursue the exchange of letters in terms of the PFE activities where the EU PFE SOFA is applied. And that's what I spoke about. We are the only nation, we include Finland, Sweden and Austria, all neutral countries have ratified the EU SOFA. The negotiation of exchange of letters present significant challenges for both Ireland and the lead or framework nation in terms of the process and engagement in the content. For some states, such as an exchange of letters may require parliamentary approval or involve cumbersome national administrative procedures. In the case of the last German battle group in 2016, it was not possible to negotiate the required exchange of letters, neither in respect of the headquarters contingent or the pre-deployment training contingent. As a result, Ireland could not participate in the live training exercise in Germany in 2016, and the HQ staff on the mission were deployed in a very different status basis relative to other EU colleagues. So let me state that we have members of the Irish Defences working in the headquarters that were treated like tourists. They had the very same rights as what any tourist would have. So they were working with a range of different member states who had the privileges of the SOFA. Members of the Irish Defence Forces were treated like tourists, that if anything had happened, they would have to go to the ambassador to seek their assistance. I personally think that is absolutely wrong, and that is why I'm wanting to correct this. To give them the rights of every other member state and give them the rights to the same rights that they are working, the same rights of people that they're working alongside of. And I was categorically told, and the department was told, and the Defence Forces were told, that the battle group, the German battle group in 2020, that we would not be able to participate in it if we hadn't got a SOFA in place. So that was the minister of the host country stated to me, we cannot have this exchange of letters any longer, that we now have to have this in a legal status, a legal framework, and we had to have a SOFA in place. And that was another reason as to why I was so determined to have this put in place in a right, proper and legal footing. I said about the approval of Dáil Éireann and why I believe, I said about the exchange of letters. You spoke about the EU Army. The Treaty of Lisbon does not provide for the creation of a European Army or for conscription or to any military formation. Any change to this position would require a treaty change, and no such change is proposed. The protocol on the concerns of the Irish people on the Treaty of the Lisbon Treaty expressly states, the Treaty of Lisbon does not provide for the creation of a European Army or for conscription or any military formation, and that the Treaty of Lisbon does not affect or prejudice Ireland's traditional policy of military neutrality. And I stated that when I was accused, when I was bringing PESCO through the Dáil, that this is the start of an EU army. Absolutely couldn't be further from the truth, because in the same way it's provided for in the Lisbon Treaty protocols. I think, Deputy, you spoke there about people can. I know when I brought this to the Dáil the week before last, or was it last week, an awful lot of people didn't understand what a SOFA is. I think The simplest way of describing this is to give members of the Irish Defence Forces the very same legal rights and status of all other member states. And when I explained that to an awful lot of the ordinary people on the street, when I was asked about this over the last week and a half, they were shocked that they hadn't got this in place already. And then they said, well, does this not raise issues around our military neutrality? Absolutely not. The members of the general public who I've spoken to, and I've no doubt there's many other members of the general public out there who are educating themselves on this, are absolutely cannot understand why this has not been in place previously. We all talk about the absolute great work that members of the Irish Defence Forces do, and right and proper that we talk about the great work that the Irish members of the Defence Forces do. But in saying that, if we are to respect the work that they are doing overseas, well then we should be giving them the same rights and privileges as all other member states.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy Seán Barrett.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, Minister, could you say, as a former minister myself, what's really happening here is we don't know what we want to do. Are we going to engage in peacekeeping, or are we going to extend from peacekeeping into other areas which is not traditional for the Irish Defence Forces? Peacekeeping is something that Ireland is very proud of. It's probably the best in the world in peacekeeping, but now we're being dragged into all other areas. What's the wording that's used? Crisis management. What is crisis management? Crisis management can mean anything. Our defence forces have an expertise second to none in terms of peacekeeping abroad. We have a small defence forces, and we have to look after our own country as well as engaging in peacekeeping missions abroad. But we're now talking about crisis management. That extends so far that you're talking about way beyond what was traditional for the Irish Defence Forces. And the question now is, are we going to make up our mind that we're only going to engage in peacekeeping? Full stop. Not crisis management. Because crisis management, as I said before, covers a multitude. And we're asking for the impossible here. And, you know, I personally think that the reputation that we've built up as producing peacekeeping forces in various parts of the world are second to none. And are we going to drag ourselves in as part and parcel of operations called crisis management? That's a totally different scenario to peacekeeping. It's a different form of training. It's a different form of having the equipment to deal with crisis management. You know, I'm sure you've been the same. I was down through the years. I was so proud when I went to visit the troops abroad and the manner in which they became part of the community, that they, you know, it was incredible the way they built up this skill of becoming part of the community that they were there to protect. And they weren't, it wasn't what sort of machinery they had with them or what sort of tools of trade that they had with them. It was individual skills that was doing it. And, you know, I fear that we're now talking about, you know, while serving overseas on peacekeeping and crisis management. Now, what are we asking our defence forces to do? Are we asking them to serve overseas on peacekeeping and crisis management? That's a totally different area. And I'm here today to ask that we revert back to where we were the best at, peacekeeping. And you don't want all of this. Leave it to others if they want to engage in becoming part and parcel of, you know, battle groups. Imagine Battle groups aren't peacekeepers. The word battle group means that they're trained to go into battle. And we want to be part of the battle groups. Since when do peacekeepers become involved in battle groups? You know, we're losing our way here, with the greatest of respect. And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I will, for as long as I'm here, which won't be very long now, unfortunately, but I will defend the role of the Irish Defence Forces in peacekeeping. Leave it to others who want to play games with battle groups and everything else, but it's a totally different skill. And we were highly respected abroad. Our troops were so highly respected that they're way above all of this stuff about the equipment and the manner in which they went about doing what they were supposed to be doing. And I think there's a cut-off point here, and it has to be a cut-off point. The Minister and his officials may disagree with my point of view, but I'm setting out my point of view, that the Irish Defence Forces are excellent, the best in the world at peacekeeping. But I doubt very much if they have the same skills as crisis management and getting involved in battle groups. There's a hell of a difference between peacekeeping and battle groups. It's as simple as that. And, you know, I just fear that we're losing our way because it's the sort of in thing, being in Europe, that we're supposed to participate overall in all areas of activities, including battle groups. And the next thing we'd be called upon to contribute to crisis management, which involves a different aspect of peacekeeping. So, Chairman, I would urge colleagues to be very careful about extending our activities beyond our capabilities. We're a small country with an expertise in peacekeeping, and we should be proud of what we're doing and proud to train others in our methods of peacekeeping and not become one of the gang which is involved in battle groups. So, you know, please, I think it's important that we get a message across that we're not participating in other activities, and because the other boys in Europe are engaged, because Germany are involved in battle groups, are the Paddies going to be involved in battle groups? My answer to that is no. We shouldn't, because we should stick to what we're excellent at and very good at and have contributed peacekeeping around the world. And, you know, I was so proud at the time when I was a minister and I witnessed the manner in which these people be integrated into the local areas where they were protecting the local community. They weren't hostile. And they didn't need sort of the most modern piece of equipment, because it was the manner in which they went about their peacekeeping mission. And it's better to be good at something than to be half good at a lot of things. And my argument is, let's keep being very good at peacekeeping.
Thanks, Deputy Barrett. Minister.
Thank you very much, Deputy. There's a range of different issues there that you raised, but let me talk just about peacekeeping and the manner in which members of the Irish Defence Forces carry out their duties as peacekeepers. And they still excel in carrying out their duties as peacekeepers. Unfortunately, peacekeeping has changed over the years. And I've had the opportunity, and I don't want to be take me up wrong in any way, in that from where we are now in 2019 to compare to where you were, Deputy, when you were Minister, right? People say peacekeeping hasn't changed. The nature of peacekeeping hasn't changed. But the threats, the complex situations, the complexities of peacekeeping have changed, right? So if we are...
Sorry, could I interrupt you? We engage in missions. We decide on different missions, and we should decide on the missions that are involved in peacekeeping, not to be including peacekeeping and others.
Okay.
That's my point.
Let me state, Deputy, right, okay? I'll give UNIFIL as probably one of the perfect examples. If we were not to participate in all the training missions and the battle group training and everything like that over the last number of years, and some members of the Irish Defence Forces to UNIFIL, well, I can be absolutely, and military personnel and military management will assure me that, well then, we shouldn't be participating in it, because if we haven't got the training, working with like-minded states and like that, looking at the complexity, looking at the threats compared to what they were in the 70s and 80s and maybe the 90s, to compare to what the threats are now, the equipment that other countries have that are threatening maybe the country that we are protecting is absolutely second to none. So we do have to be able to participate in the battle groups, supports the development of rapid deployment skills, the capabilities within the Defence Forces, together with improved interoperability with other like-minded states, and Ireland's participation in UN battle groups or EU battle groups also reflects Ireland's support for the UN, where successive Secretary Generals of the United Nations have endorsed the development of the EU battle groups concept and endorsed Ireland's participation therein. So these are the people that are in the UN, that the Secretary Generals, that see the importance of countries like Ireland to be able to develop their skills, their capabilities, and the way to do that is to working with other like-minded states in training, and the battle groups are one of those training missions that we are able to gain invaluable experience. Ireland's active engagement in the EU battle groups demonstrates Ireland's commitment to the development of EU capabilities in the area of crisis management. You spoke about crisis management. Crisis management is about humanitarian, peace enforcement, peacekeeping. There's a range of, absolutely, and we could stay here and argue about what is the meaning of crisis management.
Correct.
Right? Absolutely. I'm not going to get into that now, but let me say that it does include a huge myriad.
That's why we should stick to peacekeeping, which we're very good at.
Absolutely, but
don't be getting involved in crisis management.
But let me say, Deputy, and I'd say this in a really genuine way, that peacekeeping has totally changed over the last 20 years. And let me say, like I've had this to the chairman, that the only way that you can actually go and see the way our peacekeepers operate, the way, and it has changed, the way it has changed, the way it has, the complexities of it, the different type of threats that are there now, is to go and visit one of our missions, to talk to the people on the ground, that have the experience of exactly what peacekeepers and what they do on a daily basis. Like, you know, I had a veteran out with me on St. Patrick's Day, and he spoke about probably one of the most dangerous things that they did was minesweeping, or not, the roads on a daily basis was sweeping it for road mines or whatever. That's still a part and parcel of it, but it's gone more way complex than actually that was back in the 80s. And the equipment that we use now, we have to have the very best of equipment. We have to be able to match and to what other countries have. We have to be able to match what the other countries threat to the people on the other side. That, like, if we don't have the equipment, well then I would absolutely say, well, why should we be involved in peacekeeping if we haven't got the right and proper equipment? It's gone way more advanced compared to what it was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And peacekeeping now is about, and part and parcel of that is equipment and having the up-to-date and the advanced equipment. Spoke there about what areas of training will members of the Irish Defence Forces get in the battle group. We'll have the engineering special search capability. I spoke to Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan on the explosive ordnance disposal, the capability and security platoon together with staff posts. These are all very important training. That if we are to be working with like-minded countries in a peacekeeping situation, well then we have to have the experience of being working alongside these people. And unless we train them, equip them in the very best manner that we can, well, if we didn't do that, I would be saying, well, I wouldn't be happy to send members of the Defence Forces on any peacekeeping mission. I think Deputy was trying else to repeat that.
Well, maybe I didn't put my point across. I just repeat, since Adam was a boy, the skills of peacekeeping are the same. It's about communicating, about infiltrating into the local communities,
and we still do that, Deputy, to a very high manner.
But the fact that you arrive with lorry loads of guns and equipment and all sorts of things, that's going to improve peacekeeping. Leave it to others. We're a small country. We have an expertise in peacekeeping. We have a small defence forces, and they're very good at it, at what they were trained to do, and it's a tradition to Irish people in peacekeeping. It's talking about building up connections with the local community that you're there to protect, being part and parcel of all these things. But anyway, we'll have to beg to differ. I just think that we're losing our way because we've become one of the guys and we want to join the battle groups. Even the word battle group is wrong for a so-called peacekeeping mission. So it's all wrong, but it's the thinking. And we have to, because we're in the EU now, we think we have to get involved in all aspects of EU activity. We're excluded on our own, wish. We're excluded from a lot of the military involvement in European issues. So, let's keep to what we're good at and get on with it. But, anyway,
Thanks,
well, Chairman, what I will say is
a brief response.
Absolutely, Chairman. As a government and as Minister, I have an obligation to protect members of the Irish Defence Forces when they go overseas. And that is giving them the very best of training, the very best of kit and equipment, that the people that they're working alongside of, is that part and parcel of it? Well, I'm going to do that.
I accept that fully.
And like when you talk about lorry loads of equipment and everything going out, well, if we didn't send out the lorry loads of equipment and something happened to one of the members of the Defence Forces, I can be absolutely assured that I'd be in front of the door asking why were the members of the Irish Defence Forces not given the right and proper equipment while they're on overseas peacekeeping duties. And I say that in a very genuine way, that the complexities of peacekeeping have totally changed over the years. They're still very much involved in the communities. They're still very much reaching out to the different organisations, that it be education, health, water infiltration, whatever, in the communities. Still very much part and parcel. They're still at it. They do it to a very high standard. I go and visit some of the aid projects that members of the Irish Defence Forces are doing. They still go up and play soccer and football with the local communities. They still go to the local markets. They still go and sit and drink tea with the local communities. Absolutely. And people will say members of the Irish Defence Forces are in the Premier Division when it comes to peacekeeping. Absolutely. But on the other side of that, as Minister and as a military management advised me on the safety of any mission that's going overseas, and I asked them for the risks that are involved. But in all of that, there's an obligation on government and minister and military management to make sure that members of the Irish Defence Forces are equipped, trained in the very best manner, and that they're equipped and trained in the very same manner as the people they are working alongside. And I would absolutely make no excuses whatsoever for equipment and training, and whatever that training is. And military management has said to me that is participating in the battle groups is a very good way of training and giving the best of training and giving them the expertise of working alongside other member states. Working, getting interoperability is so important. And if that is the advice that I will get from military management, well then they are the experts in the field of this. They know themselves what is the best way forward. And Chairman, I've stated this on numerous occasions. I think it is so important, and I encourage members of the committee here to go and visit. I know that you've been in talks over the last number of days, but I think UNIFIL is a place to go and visit. You see the troops, you talk to the troops. We have 2 outposts. You see the importance of the work, the interoperability, working with like-minded states, equipment display and everything like that. I think that is so important. You can go to one of the exercises in the Glen of the Mal, that are pre-deployment exercises, and just to see the level of training that actually goes in here. But and I go back to Deputy O'Sullivan's point, is there's no use we sending our members of the Defence Forces to the Glen of the Mal or down to Kilworth in Cork, running through the mountains themselves, and then having to go to UNIFIL or the Golan Heights or whatever mission it is, and not having the experience of working with other like-minded states. And I absolutely, and I've seen this more and more, the more I go to visit overseas, I see more the importance of Ireland participating in whatever mission is suitable to us on a training purpose exercise, for training
That's
purposes.
the point that you're making. It's the missions that we decide to involve ourselves in. That's the point I'm making. You don't, I mean, we have a small defence force, and my point, sorry, Chairman, is that, you know, our expertise is in genuine peacekeeping. And we don't need to get in with the big boys with all this heavy equipment, where it's peacekeeping plus. Peacekeeping is peacekeeping. And, you know, there's plenty of missions that we can get ourselves involved in, besides, you know, feeling obliged to become part and parcel of.
Thanks, Deputy Barrett. Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan indicated.
I do know that our troops do engage with local communities, and you did mention football matches there, and it just struck me, you know, we think of that very famous, iconic football match between the German and the British troops during World War I, where they came out Christmas Eve, but then a few hours later they were back bombing the hell out of each other. And I still come back to this contradiction that we have between what we are on one hand, where we are so well respected for the way in which we work in these poorest of poor countries, and we're working with local communities, and part of that work is about building capacity, it's about working with civil society, it's about peace, it's about reconciliation. And then if our troops are coming in a very, very different capacity, there's a definite contradiction and an irony in that. And we did mention the bigger picture, the wider debate. We are foreign affairs and defence, so we are in that position to see all sides of what we are doing internationally. There's a new paper coming out on aid. I'm just wondering, has the Department of Defence had any input into that, so that there is no contradiction between what we're doing on one hand and what we're doing with the other hand? And my last point is, fine for our troops, they have to be well trained, the skills, the equipment necessary to do their work. But as Deputy Barrett has said, we have to define what that work is. Now, some of the troops that we have seen and we know about them, part of their training is on very intense, very dubious, very suspect interrogation skills of prisoners. Is that part of the training as well that's going on?
Thanks, Deputy Sullivan. Minister.
I don't have any knowledge of that, Deputy. I'll come back to you on that. But the humanitarian aid projects and everything like This is an area where I feel yes, we've had some contact on the paper that you spoke about, but I think it's an area where particularly the Defence Forces, I feel if there's Irish aid agencies working on the ground in the same areas where we are carrying out, in the same area of a mission area, that we get more involved in that. I've spoken to the military management on this, but both can go hand in hand. Like, you can't have development aid without security, and if you have, like, in securing a country, whatever the story is, but then there needs to be development aid, like, following up on that as well in developing a country or whatever, right? But let me say, Deputy, what I would like is that there is some Irish aid agencies out there that we can develop a closer relationship with. Something that I have spoken about. I haven't done a whole lot on, but I've spoken about it. And if you have any ideas personally yourself on how we could do it, I would absolutely be delighted to hear from you in a private capacity.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy Snoddy.
Yeah, the more the Minister speaks, the more questions pop up in my head in relation to this. And I just got his answer in relation to the EU SOFA, which he said in his first contribution is covered by the Lisbon Treaty, and therefore doesn't require Dáil approval. And then he said, well, he can just get Cabinet, and kind of he's been transparent, and I welcome transparency on every occasion. The question I asked is this cover, linking the two together, is it cover for the Partnership for Peace SOFA? I also asked earlier I presume that we have UN SOFAs for all of the UN missions that we've been involved in the past, and has there been any difficulty, any delay, bureaucratic delays, and that he was blaming on Germany in terms of the EU battle group. So at the moment there's 504 of the 565 soldiers who are operating overseas on UN-mandated missions, which most of us would feel that that's where Ireland has excelled and should concentrate on. There are 42 others on EU operations abroad, and 19 other soldiers, officers and the like, in various EU, NATO or the OSCE offices dotted around the country. That's 17 countries outside of the UN message or missions which Ireland soldiers are abroad. Is there currently, therefore, 17 exchange of letters? These letters, these guarantees of immunities and that you spoke about, and the additional protections which soldiers should rightly have. Now, the interesting thing is that you said in relation to the German battle group, and I'll come to some context of that the German minister basically was the one who was dictating to Ireland whether we should be involved in the EU battle group. Now, you must remember that the underlying military strategy, or the policy strategy of the Germans, is to further integrate Germany into the creation of a European army. And that's not me saying that, that's the head of the country saying only last week that the aim is to build a common military culture. That means you kind of level the playing field. You make it easier kind of for different countries to amalgamate, have joint operations, suck them fully into the apparatus and send them off on missions when they have been trained. And she further went on, and that military culture, common defence industry and common line in arms exports, that contributes to the creation of European army. So that is exactly what is happening. These small little steps, and some of them are quite big steps. In this case, it is kind of, you've said we don't require it, but why are we taking steps that are further integrating us into? If the Germans don't want Irish troops in the EU battle groups, they should say it. If it means an exchange of letters. If they want it, they will recognise that the tradition of Ireland is to seek those letters, and that has worked well in the past. So in some ways, the German Parliament is dictating not only our economic strategies, now seems to be dictating our defence strategy. In relation to you mentioned, and I should have asked it earlier, in your contribution you said that Irish soldiers were sent on deployment to the Congo in 2003 without the letters, or without the conclusion of the letters of exchange. In fact, they were back home before that happened. Are you suggesting, and this would be an interesting one for Michael Smith, that he was negligent or dereliction of duty in sending Irish soldiers abroad on an EU mission to the Congo without the cover that you're now demanding that we kind of just sign up willy-nilly, and that will never come back before the House again. You started off saying that RACO is a great organisation, which I agree with you. Their job is to represent the interests of officers, to protect kind of their future and ensure that they have, or that the military have, the required equipment and resources to fully train them in that. But they aren't the ones who dictate military policy. In terms of international military policy, that's the job of the House, the Oireachtas, and then thereafter the Minister. They have points of view, kind of, and yes, it is useful sometimes to be working with people of fellow standing and whatever, but it's not their role. You also mentioned that the Attorney General has been involved in this, and it's going to be very long. So the question there is, when did you first ask the Attorney General to look at this matter? You've been Defence Minister since 2011, 8 years. The WikiLeaks cable suggests kind of this was virtually ready to be signed off on in 2010. It's a long time kind of for a very short piece of document. So kind of how, since 2010 to now, did the Attorney General overcome the problems? Because obviously if he didn't agree for signing up, they had indicated, as the official in question in the WikiLeaks, that there was problems with us signing up, and all of a sudden we've overcome them overnight and you want to present it to the House. Is it just the arithmetic in the chamber suggested, or has there been guarantees from the other countries that gives us the additional protections that you may require, but I don't believe we should be looking for? I should think that we should continue along the way that Deputy Barrett suggested, and that we should continue to look to the UN for the honourable duties and laudable duties of operating overseas in peacekeeping missions.
Thanks, Deputy. A brief response, Minister. We have a bit of a time constraint.
Right, okay. What I did state earlier, that the Deputy accused me of that we're leading the way for Ireland joining an EU army at some point in the future. And I stressed in what I said was, the Treaty of Lisbon does not provide for the creation of a European army or for conscription to any military formation. Any change to this position would require a treaty change, and no such change is proposed. The protocol and concerns of the Irish people and the Treaty of Lisbon expressly states, I quote, the Treaty of Lisbon does not provide for the creation of a European army or for conscription to any military formation, and that the Treaty of Lisbon does not affect or prejudice Ireland's traditional policy of military neutrality. And that's the answer that I gave you earlier, Deputy.
No, in terms of the Lisbon Treaty, the point I was making, because I didn't make that accusation in the record, you said and I quote, "I would like to highlight that the approval from the Dáil is not required in relation to the ratification of the EU SOFA, as this is covered by the Lisbon Treaty." You further then said later on that you don't need the Dáil approval and that the Cabinet could sign this anyway.
Yes.
Now, in that you're suggesting that it doesn't even need signature, it doesn't need the Dáil or anything.
The PFP SOFA requires the approval of Dáil under Article 29(5) of the Constitution.
Exactly, so one is cover for the other, if you're linking the two together.
But let me say, you spoke there about the representative associations. I think it's important for me, as Minister, to listen to the representative associations. I think it's very important when we're formulating policy that we listen to the representative associations, and you listen to everyone. You listen to members of the opposition parties, you listen to the spokespersons. The white paper on defence was a very wide people who contributed to that, and that's the defence policy.
You present them as if they dictated that.
I think it's very important that we do that. The advice from the Attorney General expressly stated that the SOFA agreements could not legally apply in Ireland, as foreign militaries could not be based in Ireland due to provisions of Article 1562 in the Constitution. And the AG's advice did allow for Article 1562 could be interpreted in such a way that SOFAs could apply in Ireland in certain cases, such as transit or attendance at conferences of foreign troops, should the government so decide. On foot of the government AG's advice, and having considered the matter in detail, the decision was taken as a matter of policy not to apply the provisions of SOFAs in such situations. This decision was endorsed by government in its decision to make explicit reservations on ratification of these agreements. The decision is ensured by the proposed reservations, which state clearly, without any room for interpretation, that Ireland shall not be a receiving state for the purposes of these agreements. Deputy, you spoke there about the exchange of letters. You said this is a very simple way. It's not a very simple way.
I didn't say it was
well,
simple.
I won't say simple, but why can't we continue? We will not be able to participate in the battle group, the German battle group of 2020, unless we have the SOFAs.
Because the Germans dictate to us.
No.
That's
sure,
what you said.
let me say, Deputy, it is a matter of maybe German policy that they do not want any participating countries participating in the battle group unless SOFAs are in place. They're one of their own national policies. We've a national policy where we state that we shall not be receiving we shall not give SOFAs to any transient or visiting members. That's one of our own policies here. We can have that policy if we want. That's the policy that we put in place.
Exactly.
And that's the policy that the Germans have put in place.
But they're dictating to us what happens with an EU battle group if the exercises are in Germany.
I think, Chair, I will draw the meeting to a conclusion fairly
through the Chair. I think we do not dictate German policy. They dictate German policy themselves. And I'm not in a position to tell them or to dictate to them otherwise. I'm not going to do that. But if we want to participate in the German battle group of 2020, well, then we have to have the SOFAs in place. I think it's very important that I be open and transparent, that we bring it through the Dáil. I'm hiding absolutely nothing here.
This is a vote on our participation in an EU battle group.
And
That's basically what you're saying.
We do it in a very open and transparent manner, in a very transparent way, Chairman.
I want to thank the Minister and the members for their discussions and their views on this important issue this morning. In accordance with Standing Order 90, the following message will be sent to the Clerk of the Dáil. The Select Committee on Foreign Affairs and Trade and Defence has completed its consideration of the following motion. That Dáil Éireann approves the following order in draft. 1. The agreement between the Member States of the European Union concerning the status of military and civilian staff seconded to the institutions of the European Union, of the headquarters and forces which may be made available to the European Union in the context of the preparation and execution of the tasks referred to in Article 17.2 of the Treaty on European Union, including exercises, and of the military and civilian staff of the Member States put at the disposal of the European Union to act in this context, done at Brussels on 17 November 2003, a copy of which was laid before Dáil Éireann on the 2nd of January 2019, and 2. The North Atlantic Treaty Organisation Partnership for Peace Status of Forces Agreement, done at Brussels on the 19th of June 1995, a copy of which was laid before Dáil Éireann on the 2nd of January 2019, subject to the respective reservations, copies of which were laid before Dáil Éireann on the 2nd of January 2019. The Select Committee is adjourned sine die. Thank you.